I wonder, we've been talking about traveling. You ever traveled with a large party? Yeah? Like maybe just larger than family? Anybody travel with people like outside your family? You ever notice like the bigger the party gets, it's probably not hard to imagine that the bigger the party gets, the more complicated things become? Like, when to stop and how long you stop, and especially like if you're traveling with people that have different kind of understanding or desires for how they think the trip ought to go. But traveling with other people can be difficult. Last week we looked at the story of Abraham. It was kind of a turning point in human history where after God's creation and eviction from the garden, things had kind of gone into a tailspin and just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And then God calls out this one guy, Abraham. He says, Abraham, I want you to leave your home. I want you to hit the road. And once you get out on the road, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to provide a new home for you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make a great nation out of your family. I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth through your family. And Abraham goes, and he begins this journey with God towards a new creation, actually. I mean, it's kind of what it boils down to. He begins his journey, and last week we followed Abraham's family to the end of the book of Genesis, to the end of the beginning, if you will. And at this point, Abraham is dead, but his family is in Egypt because they'd gone there to take refuge from a famine. And they were welcomed there when they went into Egypt, but Abraham's descendants had become now, like it started with just 12 sons, and their families had grown to be quite large, because the Bible says that the women of Abraham's descendants were vigorous childbearers. They were just making babies like crazy, and so fast, so much that they'd outgrown. They were becoming bigger than the Egyptian community that they were living in, and so it became a threat. It's like, hey, there's so many of Abraham's descendants that if they decide, they can like throw us out of our own land. And so they decided to put them into bondage. They made slaves out of them so that they could keep them under control. And as a result of that, you remember when Abraham was called out of his homeland, that he went, Hebrews says, because he was going to build a city whose architect was God. But now Abraham's descendants are not building a city whose architect is God. They're building a city whose architect is Pharaoh. And they're there for 430 years. And during that 430 years, we have no record of God actually having a conversation with Abraham's descendants like we saw in the book of Genesis when he called Abraham, and then with Abraham, his son Isaac, and with Isaac, his son Jacob, and with Jacob, Joseph. And we had this kind of conversational connection that God was developing with his people. And then maybe there was conversations that happened, but it wasn't recorded in the scriptures for us. Until the burning bush. Moses, who was an Egyptian slave, but had been rescued as a child from an edict that was part of Pharaoh's control over the Israelites by his daughter, and raised as an Egyptian. And then he takes sides with his people, which puts him in opposition to Pharaoh, and he runs away for 40 years into the wilderness. And he's in the wilderness now, and God comes to him famously in a burning bush. And God speaks again to Abraham's descendant Moses. And he says to Moses, Moses, look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people, Israel, out of Egypt. You must lead my people, Israel, out of Egypt. And this begins a whole dialogue where Moses is kind of like, you know what, I'm a shepherd. That's not really my gig. Sounds like a really big deal, and I'm not really very good with words like Tim. I'm not as eloquent and proficient. It's like, yeah, you got the wrong guy, which honestly, that's what I said too about 40 years ago. You got the wrong guy. God says, you're the one. I'm sending you to Egypt to get my people out of bondage. And that begins this whole, he goes and he talks to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says no, and he says, let my people go, and Pharaoh says no, and then they have these whole 10 plagues, which are really, really messy, and I won't go into, but you have, frogs and flies and bloody rivers and all kinds of horrible stuff, but Pharaoh refuses until the very last plague, which we know as the Passover. The 10th plague was that God was going to send a spirit of death over the Egyptians, and take every firstborn son of the Egyptian family. And the Israelites were told to mark their doorposts with the blood of a lamb, and the Spirit would pass over their homes and rescue them. And it's that plague that convinces Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. We've been talking about Easter eggs, little windows that we have throughout this story of God being, showing little signs of things that are going to happen in the future. And this is one of those Easter eggs, this little window, and it's the blood of the Lamb that saves the Jewish people from this plague. And we will encounter the blood of a lamb again today and as we move on to the Easter story. And because they had been so vigorous in their childbirthing, now 430 years later, 600,000 men plus women and children leave Egypt. Now, I want to do the math on this. I'm not smart enough to do it. How many children did each generation need to be producing to get to over 1 million in 430 years? If you're really smart with math, I would love to know that. How many did each family have to reproduce? I see a couple of you reaching for your calculators. Don't miss the rest of the sermon for it, all right? But they leave. Now, we're talking about over 1 million people, and that's just like a traveling party that is kind of hard to fathom, because I've done, I leave with 6 people packing up for a backpacking trip, and they're going out into the wilderness, they're going hiking, 100 million versus 1 million versus 6. I can't even imagine what the undertaking is. But they leave, and they go out, and it's kind of think of it as Israel's family vacation. And they've been slaves for a long time, so 430 years, like family vacation, that sounds like a pretty good deal. And it starts out kind of like on a good note. They go to the seashore. Let's go to the sea. Great. They get to the beach. Pharaoh changes his mind, and he's bearing down on them, and he wants them back as slaves. And now they're sunk, if you will. They're trapped between the sea and freedom, and Pharaoh's army is coming, and God uses Moses to part the seas and rescues Israel from the sea into the desert. And they get out into the desert, and some people like to go to the desert. I mean, it's not really my favorite place to go, but a lot of people like to go to the desert. And they get out into the desert, but it doesn't seem like they really adequately planned. And this has happened to me when I've taken people out on the trail. Every once, you leave a couple things behind. It's like, oh, dang, we didn't bring any food. Well, they brought some food, but they ran out of food. And then that's where God provides the manna, and every day he gives them manna so they can eat. And God's showing them, you can count on me. You can trust me. I'm going to be there for you. And it's like, yeah, this manna's okay, but we're kind of we want some meat. And so God gives them quail. And then they run out of water. And it's like, we're really, really thirsty and we're going to die. Why don't you just live in Egypt? And God provides water from a rock. And so they're in the desert, and it didn't go great, but God kept showing up for them in the ways that they needed him. And then they go, great, we've been to the sea, we've been to the desert, let's go now to the mountain. And in Exodus chapter 19, they get to the mountain, and it's Mount Sinai, and it's there that God has been with these people. He's been kind of leading them along for a while, and he decides to lay down. You're traveling with 1 million people, right? You need some ground rules. Like, how are we going to like live together in peace with all these people and all this, stuff going on? And how are we going to make this work? So he takes them out and he gives them what I'm going to call the 10 camp commandments. Commandments, or right, anyway. So he gives them the 10 commandments, and after the 10 commandments, he gives them some camp etiquette. How to treat your house servants, some law and order things, some business practices. He gives them some design for some annual festivals to celebrate how he'd been among them and provided for them and all this stuff. And so now we're out in the desert. We got over 1 million people, and we're at the base of the mountain. And at this point, it says, Moses, tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from everyone whose heart prompts them to give. I want you to collect the things that I'm going to tell you to get, and I want you to ask the people to give them. So this is what I would call like the first church building campaign, like in the history of the world. He's like, we're gonna build something, and effectively, he's kind of saying, he's stepping into the role as travel guide. He's already been the travel guide, but maybe they didn't realize yet. But he's stepping into the role as travel guide, and so he's setting this up for them. Collect these things, and then he says, make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. And then he gives them instructions. He gives them instructions on what to make. You make this thing I'm going to call the Ark of the Covenant, and it's something they're going to carry with them. And if you've ever seen the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's what they were looking for in Raiders of the Lost Ark was the Ark of the Covenant. It was the box that they used to carry the 10 Commandments, and they had some manna in there, and they had a staff in there that had bloomed in another story that I don't really have time to tell you this morning. They had the Ark of the Covenant. They had a lampstand. They had to make an altar and a courtyard and a wash basin. There was all this tabernacle that they were building. And then, so what they were going to make, how they were going to make it, God gave them the exact measurements of all the things that they were going to make, exactly how they were going to turn out, what they were supposed to look like, the size that they were supposed to be. He told them what to make it out of, what kind of materials to use. I want you to use acacia wood and bronze and silver and gold, and we're going to adorn this thing with a bunch of jewels. It's going to be this really spectacularly beautiful thing. And he tells them who's going to make it. I gifted 2 craftsmen, and they're going to oversee this building project. And so you got to let them do the job. And if you go to Exodus chapter 25 through 31. It's just like page after page after page of God giving them these specific directions on how they're going to build this tabernacle. It's the blueprint. And then you go to Exodus 35. Some things happen in the middle there. You go to Exodus 35, and it actually goes through the whole thing again. This Exodus 25 to 31 says, this is how to build it. And then you go to Exodus 35, and then it says, and they build it this way. They built it just like God had told them to build it. Now, if you started reading through Genesis chapter 1, it's actually a pretty interesting story. There's kind of this narrative that's developing of God and Moses and God and God and Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Enoch and their family, in this burgeoning family, and this growing earth, and the filling of the planet, and all these things. And there's this story that's developing that's kind of interesting until you get to Exodus 25. And it's like, man, it's like reading a blueprint. And unless you're an architect, reading a blueprint is like looking at the phone book. It doesn't make any sense. And there's so much like just attention to detail, and then they did it And then that he replays the whole thing and says, and this is how to do it, and they didn't. Couldn't he have just said, you know what, this is how to do it, and then come back to it and say, and they did it? Why do we have to go back to this whole thing? Why is it so important? And God tells Moses, he says, this place, this sanctuary that you're building is a copy, a shadow of what is in heaven. This, Moses, is why you were warned. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. This is a picture of glory. This is a shadow, a window into what I made in the garden, what I'm making in the New Jerusalem. You need to get this just right so people see where they've been and people see where they're going. And he says, and by the way, and in this tabernacle, I will dwell among you. I'm moving in. The travel guide is not going to just like leave a camp at night and go stay in some fancy. He's going to live in the camp with the Israelites. And when the tabernacle was finished, it says in Exodus 40, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. God set up camp right there with his people. God set up camp with them to dwell among them. Now, remember back in the garden, after Adam and Eve had sinned, and it was at that point that they discovered, oh my goodness, we don't have any clothes on, we're naked. And when they saw their nakedness, it says that they were ashamed, that they made fig leaves to cover up the things that they didn't want people to see. And then they went and they hid in the bushes. That whole story, right? They've sinned. They've rebelled against God now. They did the one thing that God told them not to do, and they're ashamed and they're hiding. But in the story, God still comes to look for them. Does he not know that they've sinned? They're like, wow, I didn't see that coming, missed that. How did that happen without me? Right? God still comes looking for them. And when he finds them, he doesn't say, hey, Adam and Eve, come out of the bushes. Don't worry about the fig leaves. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. He says, you just need to learn to be comfortable in your own skin. It's not what he says. What he says is, your cover-up isn't getting the job done. And it's where we encountered one of our first Easter eggs, right? That God clothed them in animal skins. And to put on animal skins, something had to be taken out of the animal. Like its life, its existence. The Lord God made garments of skin. And now he comes to Israel, where they are. They're not in the garden, but he's coming out to this place. He's coming out to the mountain of Sinai. He's coming out where they are to be with him. And he comes to them as they are. But he says, effectively, and I'm going to unpack this in a second, but essentially what he says is, I'm here with you. But when you come to see me, when you come to be with me in the camp, you need to dress accordingly. You need to be clothed the right way, right? The fig leave's not getting the job done. When I was a kid growing up in the church, we always dressed up for church. I mean, jeans and like this did not play. And those of you who are wearing shorts, whoo, man. In fact, if you're a woman and you don't have a dress on, woo-wee, right? You dressed for church. You put on your best. when you go in to meet with God. And it turns out that you can hide all manner of pride and greed and anger and tyranny underneath a three-piece suit. And you can put all kinds of gossip and self-righteousness and judgment underneath a dress. You can kind of put on the fig leaves and make it look really good, but what's on the outside is not really what the problem is. God says to Moses, and now Moses has become the mediator. He talks with God, and then he brings God's message to the people. And he comes to Moses, and just like a little context, in the tabernacle, the way it was set up, it was in the middle of the camp, and it had a courtyard, and inside the courtyard it had the tent of meeting, and in the tent of meeting you had like the entry area, and then a large curtain, and on the other side of the curtain was the Holy of Holies. And the Holy of Holies was the place where they kept the Ark of the Covenant. And it was the place where God dwelt. Now, God didn't just live in the tabernacle. God's too big to live in the box. But God would meet there in that space. And only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, and only into the Holy of Holies one time a year. And when he went in, he had to go through this whole procedure. And so God says to Moses, warn your brother Aaron, Aaron's the high priest, not to enter the most holy place behind the inner curtain whenever he chooses. If he does, he will die. If he does, he will die. For the ark's cover, the place of atonement, is there, and I myself am present in the cloud above the atonement cover. Camp hygiene for the Israelites is no joke. You need to be clean when you come into my presence. And the active ingredient, and I'll tell you up front, this is an offense to our senses, especially those of us who are animal lovers, right? The active ingredient is blood. Leviticus is the expansion of Adam and Eve's garments. Right now we've got a whole nation that we need to dress for an encounter, for a conversation with God. And it's not going to be just a matter of animal skins. It would be the blood of animals that would be offered over and over and over again during the festivals, during the Day of Atonement each year in the Holy of Holies. God says, I have given you the blood on the altar to purify you, making you right with the Lord. It is blood that makes atonement for one's life. Remember, when God gave his directions in the garden, when you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, when you do that, if you do that, when it happens, he says, you will surely die. You will die. The life of every creature is in the blood. And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin. The active ingredient in the cleansing that makes it possible for the Israelites to come and worship their God is the blood sacrifice of these animals. Now, we're on this journey from the Garden of Eden to a New Jerusalem. And trying to find our way from this home that Even now, we still long for it. Any empty space you have in your heart for anything, desires, longings that have not been fulfilled, hopes, fears, dreams, right? They all go back to we were made for something other than what we're experiencing. And towards this promise that we have of a new Jerusalem where God is going to dwell among his people. And between here and there, how do we live in this space? And there's a lot about this story, right? The blood animal sacrifices, like an offense to the senses. How do we get our brain around this? How do we understand? We come to the book of Leviticus, and how do you read just page after page after page of all these, if this happens, then you sacrifice this animal, and if this happens, you sacrifice this animal, and you have to do this many of this animal, and this many of this animal, and when this happens, and it's like page after page after page of all this stuff. What is the point of it all? At least this much, okay? Sin is a big deal. If nothing else, consider the solution of the problem of sin. Right? If the offense of sacrificing animals like strikes you to your core, and that's what covers you so you can worship God. How bad must that thing be? And we're going to, already you can anticipate what's coming in the next couple weeks. That will be the ultimate covering for sin. Sin is a big deal because we were made for life. And it's killing us. Not all at once, moment by moment, day by day, year by year. We're all going to the grave because sin entered the world and sin entered our lives. And it separates us from the source of life. Sin is a big deal. Your sin, my sin, our sin. And it's not just like the ones that I grew up, like don't drink, don't smoke, don't chew, don't go with girls who do, right? This is like the pride, the anger, the lust. Well, in fact, he says anything that is done without faith is sin, right? Wherever faith leaves the conversation, we're sinning. It's an offense to God. It's a big deal. But in spite of the obstacles, God continues to make accommodations. In the garden, he makes the animal skins so that he can have this conversation with Adam and Eve. And in the tabernacle, he provides the life of the animals, substituting it for the life of the people. He makes accommodations so that he can continue to have conversation, connection, communion with his people. God keeps showing up. He shows up in the garden, even after Adam and Eve sinned. He shows up to Noah when the whole world has gone to pot. He shows up to Abraham when things are digressing again. He shows up for Moses when he hears the cry of his people. The tabernacle was adorned with images of Eden, of flowers, fruit, angels, precious metals, and jewels. He put this camp in the middle of their camp that had all the markings of Eden. It was an outpost, like this little Eden in the center of their camp where they were. And with the same directions, the priests were to work and keep the temple, just like Adam and Eve were instructed to work and keep the garden in God's presence. God was providing for them a home away from home. While you're on this journey, I'm here in this space. I'm with you on the journey. God was constantly reminding them that he had not quit on him, that he had not turned away from them, that he kept showing up for them. And the signs of that took them back to the garden. Now, I heard this practice. I want to give this to you this week, right? God continues to show up. God continues to show up. And if our spirits are not awakened to the Spirit of God, we can very easily miss it. So I heard this guy in a video this week. He talks about stubbing your toe on God, like running into God and like being startled to wake up. And he created what he calls them micro habits. Looking for God all around us, looking for the signs of Eden, of the New Jerusalem that are currently present in the world because God is still in the world with us. Right? We're created in the image of God, which gives us capacities that no other part of creation experiences. Right? My dog, I love my dog, great dog, Carson. You don't love her because she doesn't love you, but she loves me. And don't pretend that she loves you, because it might not go well, right? Carson has no capacity to appreciate a sunrise because she's not created in the image of the Creator who made the sunrise, right? She will go for a walk and she'll pee and poop and she'll smell every tree along the way. She will not look up to see the sunrise. No effect. You can appreciate the sunrise. I can appreciate the sunrise. Why? Because we were created in the image of the Creator of the sunrise uniquely. It's a constant reminder of God's presence in the world. You have a capacity for relationships that is different than your cat, especially than your cat, right? Way more than your dog. Sorry, my bias. Capacity for relationship. That conversation that you shared with your friend, that meal that you had with your neighbor last week, that was a divine encounter because only you, created as an image bearer of God, can have that experience. It's because we were made like him. Where anytime you experience something that is life-giving, you are encountering God. In Acts chapter 17, Paul is talking to the Athenians and he says, in him we live and move and have our being. He is all around us. He's not far away, but we miss him because we're not looking for him. So the challenge that his name's Steve Cuss, the challenge that he gives is to start naming, identifying micro habits. Places where you experience life as reminders of God's presence with you. And like little Eden outposts wherever you go. Identify them so when you see them, they take you back to that space. They take you back into the presence of God. If this isn't clear, talk to me afterwards because I really, really want you to get this. And I would also, if you're in a Read It, Write It, Pray It, Share group, identify 3 or 4 and share them with your group this week to help them kind of spur them on. And if you had a Read It, Write It, Pray It, Share group and you still have that thread and you haven't been using it, go back and use it. 3 or 4 things, micro habits, places where you encounter the living God. Watch for him. Stub your toe on him. Look for him. All around us, God is present. And God keeps hiding Easter eggs in this story. He tells them to make this tabernacle and says, I will dwell among you. Foreshadowing this passage that we'll see soon in John chapter 1. And the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That word dwelling, he tabernacled among us. He tented with us. He set up in our camp. The Word became flesh. And we have seen his glory. Just as glory filled the temple, God moved into the house, the glory of God was manifest presence in the life of the Word, who was Jesus, and made his dwelling among us, full of grace and truth. God, I'm grateful that you came to Adam and Eve in the garden. And that you made a way to continue the relationship. And that you came to Israel in the wilderness. And you made a way, that you showed up for them. You didn't quit. You didn't turn your back. You continued to pursue them, knowing exactly what they had done, but desiring relationship. Thank you that you continue to show up for us. Help us see the remnants of Eden that exist all around us, and the signs of eternal glory that we long and wait for. I pray in Jesus' name.